My name is Charles Klein. Until October 16th, 2010, the worst day of my life was April 20th of that year. That was when I came home early from a business trip and found my wife of 6 years, Haley, in bed with Trent Miller. More on what happened on October 16th later. Haley's infidelity didn't completely surprise me. She had been unhappy with me and our lifestyle. The recent recession hit us hard, and we were struggling with our mortgage. Our house was worth less than our debt. Haley wanted to quit, but I believed we could make it through. Frustratingly, she had insisted on buying a large house, and now most of our income went to mortgage payments. Since Christmas, when Haley was disappointed with her gift, she had been difficult. Nothing I did made her happy. The only joy in my life was our daughter, Tina. Her happiness when I came home contrasted sharply with Haley's contempt. Marrying Haley was a mistake from the start. We were both coming out of failed relationships and rushed into marriage because we felt left out among our married friends. Despite our rocky start, I fell in love with Haley, especially after Tina was born. While some couples break up after having children, our bond seemed to strengthen, or so I thought. Turns out, Haley was either a great actress or had a split personality. Until the end of last year, I believed we had a strong relationship and a happy family. Silly me. I told Haley I'd be back from my business trip on Thursday, but I returned on Wednesday. Haley worked mornings and was free in the afternoons since Tina was in school. I decided to surprise her. Driving down our street, I noticed an unfamiliar car. It was careless of Haley, but we didn't know many neighbors, and most of the street was empty due to the housing crisis. I entered the house, not needing to be quiet because of the noise from the master bedroom. I stood for a few seconds, took some pictures on my phone, and felt overwhelming sadness realizing my marriage was over. We couldn't overcome the infidelity and betrayal. Now I had to face how much worse our financial situation would get in becoming a part-time father. I'd lose the chance to hug my daughter daily and love the woman I fell for. Haley saw me and screamed, "Get out of here, Charlie! What the hell are you doing home today?" Stunned, I reacted poorly. I grabbed Haley's hair, pulled her face close to mine, and yelled, "You're an idiot! You dare ask why I came home early? You're with that prick in my bed and you attack me?" I didn't notice Trent behind me during the chaos. He called emergency, and while we were still yelling, the cops arrived. Trent, wrapped in a sheet, met them at the door. They burst into the bedroom, saw I had pulled Haley's hair, and arrested me. After a few days, I posted bail only to find our accounts emptied and Haley gone with Tina. I returned to an empty house. When I got back to work on Monday, a bailiff was waiting. Haley had filed for divorce, accusing me of mental and physical misuse. I countersued for infidelity, but it didn't help. The courts awarded custody to Haley, and I had to pay child support and alimony. My credit tanked after selling the house. Though I still had my job, my life was a mess. If not for Tina, I would have left town. One positive note was being cleared of assault charges. I spent too many nights at Johnny's Tavern, listening to drunks claim they wouldn't let this happen to them. Some said I wasn't much of a man for letting someone steal my wife. I switched bars after hearing "fool, fool, fool" too many times. Leaving the bar one night, I felt disrespected. My coworkers pitied or despised me. I started considering the drunks' advice on revenge. They were full of bravado about how they'd retaliate against those who ruined my life. One Sunday, while visiting my parents with Tina, I shared my feelings of powerlessness over coffee. My parents were shocked, and my father broke the silence. "Do you want revenge, Charlie?" my dad asked. "I don't know, Dad. I just feel like I have to do something." "Revenge is complicated, son. It seems to fill a void, but rarely does. It can spiral out of control. You retaliate, and then their friends or family strike back. Just ask any Chicago gang member how well the eye for an eye principle works." I generally respected my father's problem-solving approach, thinking before acting, but I didn't want to be betrayed. "Charlie, I'll be very disappointed if you seek revenge. I raised you better than that. Just forget it." Violence rarely solves problems. Despite my father's advice, one Saturday night, everything aligned. As I left my diner, I saw Trent and Haley across the street leaving an expensive restaurant. While waiting for the valet, they kissed. A beautiful Lexus pulled up and they jumped in. As the car pulled away, I saw Haley's head drop into Trent's lap. I walked over to my old Chevy and sat down, cussing loudly and pounding the steering wheel. Once I calmed down, I turned the ignition. The car, the only one I could afford now that my finances were in ruins, barely started. I thought I had it all figured out. A few weeks later, I approached Trent at night. Before he knew it, I was punching him in the ribs with a bat. I avoided his head, not wanting to eliminate him, just cripple him. I swung again and broke his right leg, then his right arm. As he lay on the ground trying to protect himself, I aimed for his groin. Someone shouted, "I've already called the police!" I ran, tossing the bat, jacket, and mask into a dumpster 3 blocks away. The next time I picked Tina up, Haley asked directly, "Did you attack Trent?" I planned to make Haley sweat, so I just smirked without admitting or denying anything. I was the prime suspect, and the police questioned me multiple times. I had no alibi and simply said I spent the evening alone in my apartment. There were no witnesses, and the weapon was never found. Only motive linked me to the crime. Then one of the drunks from Johnny's got in trouble and tried to cut a deal. He told the cops he knew who struck Trent with a bat, claiming I had bragged about it. The drunk was lying, but the cops and DA didn't seem to care. I was charged with aggravated assault and attempted homicide. With limited finances, I was assigned a public defender. The DA's case relied on circumstantial evidence and a drunk's false testimony. The jury found me not guilty of attempted homicide, but guilty of aggravated assault. I couldn't argue too hard. I had stricken Trent with the bat. One thing worked in my favor. 3 months passed between the assault and sentencing, and Trent's injuries had mostly healed by then. The judge gave me a lighter sentence. 5 years in medium security prison. What happened on October 16th? It was worse than catching my wife with Trent. That was the day I had to submit to my cellmate, Ronald Iron Ron Young. I'm not bi and never had any desire to be with a man, but I had no choice. I ended up with no teeth, a broken nose, and 2 black eyes. Ron and his Aryan gang forced me into this prison relationship. Comply or die. 2 positives came from this nightmare. Ron's exclusivity meant I was off limits to other Aryans and protected from non-Aryan gangs. But what kind of sick system subjects prisoners to such misuse? I understand my 5-year sentence and loss of freedom, but why do we accept and even joke about the physical misuse of inmates? I didn't molestate anyone, so why must I endure this to survive? Getting information from the outside is tough. After 6 months and many letters, my mother visited me. My dad still refused to talk to me, and my mom came not out of sympathy but to vent. Haley married Trent and moved to Texas. They didn't let us see Tina before they left, and she was never allowed to come to the phone when we called. I haven't seen or talked to my only grandchild. I pleaded with Haley's mother, hoping for some understanding, but she laughed at me. Their family's cruelty is unbelievable. Mom, I never cheated on Haley. She cheated on me. All my letters to Tina came back unopened. I'm working with a prison attorney to get the judge to allow me to communicate with my daughter. Soon after, my mom softened, realizing how much I was hurting. She showed love for the rest of her visit and promised to return. I didn't tell her the worst parts of my incarceration, and she didn't ask. I won't detail those 5 years. I didn't re-educate myself, learn new skills, or become a better person. After a disastrous parole hearing, I learned to hide my emotions. In my first year as Iron Ron's cellmate, I gained strength at the gym, focusing my hatred on Ron, Haley, and Trent. My 6'1" frame became 210 pounds of muscle. When Ron found a new mate, I was released to fend for myself. The first time they came for me, there were 2 of them. They strike me badly, but both ended up in the hospital, and I went to special housing for a month. Unfortunately, my first parole hearing was scheduled during that month and wasn't rescheduled. It took another 2 years to meet the parole board. During the hearing, I struggled to find the right words. When a smug board member asked why I never apologized for bullying my ex-wife, I couldn't hold back and spat out all the venom that had built up inside me. I was married to Haley for 6 years and never raised a hand to her. She cheated on me in our bed. My one stupid act of attacking her boyfriend forced me to submit to another man, to survive and fight off molestate attempts. The justice system let her falsely accuse me of violence, take all our property, and prevented me from hiring a decent lawyer. It allows my ex-wife to deny me contact with my daughter. I served the full 5 years with no word from my daughter. My lawsuit against Haley went nowhere. I fought for my life every day. While I didn't learn new legal skills, I did learn how to swindle people online. I took a night job loading trucks for just over minimum wage, enough to stay off the streets. During the day, I worked on a new computer, creating the persona of Amy Carson, a widow building a humane shelter for pets. The Save Our Furry Friends website solicited donations, and with tens of thousands of email addresses, I managed to bring in some cash. In 2 months, I had $21,000, enough for my post-prison goals. Candy Sweet was a vision on a bar stool. It had been over 6 years since I touched a woman. I had a clinic certificate and $700 in my pocket. Dressed in Goodwill slacks and a sport coat, I approached her. "Charlie," she smiled, wearing pants. "Why pants, not a skirt?" I wondered, since I was spending the night with this beautiful escort for $600 plus tip. The slacks hit her prosthetic leg, which some customers had complained about to get a discount. It didn't matter to me, but I was happy to save a couple of $100. I ordered a shot of bourbon and sat next to Candy, who had a martini. The guy on her right gave me a dirty look. "The gentleman next to me insisted on buying me this drink," Candy said. I told him I was waiting for someone, so it wasn't necessary. Candy placed her hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. I counted to 5 and stayed composed. I pulled out a $20 bill. "Excuse me, sir. I appreciate you buying my companion a drink, but could you kindly accept this as a repayment?" I held the bill so he could see the scars on my hand, a reminder of prison fights. He smirked and took the $20. "Can't blame a guy for trying with such a beautiful lady." "Have a nice date," he said, then walked away. Candy thanked me for being a gentleman. "Where did you learn to diffuse situations so well?" she asked. It's too early to get into my life story, and I've heard it's best not to ask escorts personal questions. Let's talk about these cabanas. When the bartender placed my bourbon in front of me, he said, "It's on the house." "Thanks for handling that politely. We had a fight here last week that cost me $400 in damages. I'll never see a dime from the drunk who caused it, and my insurance doesn't cover the full amount." I raised my glass to the bartender and took a sip. He had poured me a good one. Candy and I finished our drinks, said goodbye, nodded to the other guy, and stepped out into the night air. "I have a room next door. Need anything to eat before we head over?" I asked. "No, I'm fine. Maybe we'll order pizza or Chinese food later. It's your money. We'll do whatever you want." I took Candy's hand and led her to the hotel. In the elevator, I couldn't stop smiling. Candy looked at me. "What?" she asked. "You're just so damn beautiful." We got to the room and got right to it. Afterward, we rested. I wasn't expecting that. Candy looked at me again. "What?" she asked. "I didn't expect it to be so good and for you to enjoy it so much." Candy laughed. "Well, I'm a professional." She kept laughing, but not at me anymore. "I've never paid for this before. I thought someone doing it for a living would have to pretend, but you didn't seem to be pretending." "Thank you. Do you want to order now?" We ordered Chinese food and showered while we waited. I noticed her prosthetic leg for the first time. It was metal just below the knee. She saw me looking. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "Actually, no, it's amazing. When we walked to the room, I didn't notice any limp." We made love again and went to bed. In the morning, we showered again, and she caught me looking at her prosthetic. "It was a motorcycle accident," she said. "What?" "My leg. Everyone wants to know how it happened. You were too polite to ask." I was told not to get personal. But now that you bring it up, how did it happen? "The guy I was dating was Randy. He bought a new bike and wanted to show off, claiming he was a great rider. I was stupid and rode with him. He started showing off, lost control, and we went down. I lost my leg." "What happened to Randy?" "Neither of us wore helmets. Another stupid decision. He damaged his head on a lamppost, went into a coma, and died a week later when they turned off the machine. I know I sound cold, but he crashed, and now my leg is gone. He didn't have insurance, so I had to cover all my medical bills. That's why I'm a strumpet. The worst part? My parents cut me out of their lives when they found out. They didn't want a strumpet for a daughter. There are worse things than getting paid for lovemaking." "Like what?" "Like my ex-wife, for example." So I told Candy about Haley. She agreed my ex was worse and called her an even bigger strumpet. All I could do was laugh, probably for the first time. "Are you hungry? Can I buy you breakfast?" I asked. "Yeah, that would be nice. Then I have to get to class. I'm not going to be a strumpet forever." You hear about guys falling in love with courtesans, and with someone like Candy, I understand why. But let's be realistic. She's a courtesan, and even if she wasn't, what could I offer any woman? The following day, I eagerly anticipated the second part of my plan. I met Juwan Price at a downtown diner. Juwan, an outside liaison for a black prison gang, named a price, and I agreed on one condition. When the knife slit his throat, 2 names, mine and Johansson's, would be whispered in his ear. Once Juwan agreed, I handed him $15,000. Juwan was one of the smartest, accused but never convicted. I knew what was happening inside. "I can't blame you for wanting revenge." "It's not revenge, it's justice. Johansson was a good guy. About a year after he became Young's plaything, he died. Rumors on the yard said Ron held the kid's head too long and strangled him. Johansson deserved better. Young spent 2 months in solitary and was jailed for not reporting Johansson's end of life until the next morning. That's it." Whatever the reason, he's a dead man, and you know no one will ever find out about our deal, right? I understand. I haven't lasted 5 years by talking too much. Juan nodded and left. 4 days later, 4 inmates were eliminated in a prison riot triggered by the stabbing end of life of Arian Ronald Iron Ron Young. 1 inmate was suspected of the homicide and was eliminated in the riot. The prison closed for 3 days. The Amy Carson website had run its course. I shut it down before law enforcement noticed and started maltreating me. It was a small matter now, with too little money involved for any agencies to investigate. My focus shifted to finding Tina. Haley's Facebook page had disappeared 2 years ago. The last post said their family lived in the Dallas suburbs. Tina had just turned 9, and the happy family, Haley, Trent, and Tina, posed in front of Disneyland's gates. Then, nothing. Imagine my surprise when, just for fun, I Googled Trent Miller and found he was living in Chicago again. Nothing came up on Haley, but at least I had a lead. It cost a private investigator 1,000 of my illicit earnings to find out where Trent lived and worked, that he no longer lived with my ex and where he hung out after work. It took Trent a few minutes to recognize me sitting next to him at the bar. Understandable, since I looked different from the last time he saw me, during my sentencing for striking him with a Louisville slugger. My muscular build, smashed nose, and shaved head probably looked intimidating. He turned to me and asked, "Are we going to have a problem?" I had thought about the question and prepared an answer. "No, Trent. Striking you with a baseball bat was a mistake. It cost me 5 years of freedom, countless horrors in prison, and the pleasure of watching my little girl grow up. I came to ask if you know where Tina is." "I'd tell you if I did. Haley left me for another guy, and the 3 of them left for parts unknown." I watched Trent's eyes as he answered. "In prison, you learn to make eye contact because eyes are the windows to the soul." I believed Trent was telling the truth. To reinforce my intuition, Trent continued, "Charlie, I shouldn't have gotten involved with Haley while she was still married to you. It was wrong. I really loved Haley and thought she loved me. It hurt like hell when she left me for that guy. It was the first time I understood how you felt. When we started dating, she fed me lies that I didn't realize until I came back here and talked to some couples you used to know. When I first met Haley, she told me you misused her and Tina, said your marriage was a sham, and it was only a matter of time before she died or divorced you. I thought I was her knight in shining armor. When you strike me, it only reinforced her story." Trent sipped his beer and continued, "I disagreed with Haley when she cut you and your family out of Tina's life. I thought it was a mistake. Haley told me to back off, that Tina wasn't my child, and I had no say. Tina and I had a good relationship during those 3 years. I loved her, but I was never her daddy. Tina missed you." I tried not to cry when Trent said that, but my eyes watered. Trent asked the bartender for a pen and paper. "I don't know where they ended up, but here's the name of the guy who replaced me. Barry Stewart. He was a carpenter hired by a Plano real estate developer, Chase Holmes. He was working on homes a block away from our house. I have no idea how he and Haley met. I found out when a neighbor called to ask why Haley was loading his truck. I got home just before they left. We were yelling when the cops arrived. I recognized his name and place of employment because of the police. They left, and I found a note in the kitchen saying goodbye. Our accounts were cleaned out. I spent thousands trying to find Haley, but got nowhere. A year later, I sued for infidelity and abandonment, sold the house, and moved here." Trent's face showed resentment as he told his story. He still held a grudge against Haley and me. All I wanted was to see my daughter. I thanked Trent for the information, bought him a beer, and left the bar, pondering my next move. Trent had spent thousands looking for Haley. Why should I waste my limited resources doing the same? There was one person who likely knew where Haley and Tina were, Haley's mother. However, she would probably prevent me from finding out. It was risky. If caught, I'd be sent back to prison. But I couldn't think of another way. Margaret Turner was a creature of habit, always attending church every Sunday at 9 a.m. She always left a spare house key in the faux stone by the patio door. Why bother with a spare key when Brutus, her Rottweiler, was always there? At 9:02, I climbed over the fence from the alley behind her house. The key was in place. I opened the patio door and heard Brutus growl, a sound that would have scared anyone else. Brutus came around the corner into the kitchen where I stood, hoping he remembered me. It had been 6 years since Brutus had last seen me. But years didn't matter. Brutus rose up on his hind legs and licked my face. He remembered the man who had picked him up at the shelter, brought him to Margaret's house, trained him, and gave him treats. While Brutus was reacquainting himself with me, I walked over to the counter, took a dog treat from the jar and threw it on the floor. Brutus scrambled to get it. I took advantage of the pause to look around. The kitchen hadn't changed since John Turner died 9 years ago. A computer on Margaret's desk was where she paid the bills. I turned it on, and a password prompt appeared. After a moment's thought, I typed John 316. The computer began to boot up. While it was starting, I went through the drawers and found some letters with return addresses. Haley lived in El Paso. I inserted a flash drive into the USB port and copied Margaret's photo, video, and email folders. After getting everything I came for, I shut down the computer, scratched Brutus behind the ears, closed the door, and replaced the key. I spent the rest of Sunday watching videos and pictures of my daughter growing up. Tina had grown so much. She was such a beautiful young girl. I felt like a fool for missing those years. From the envelopes and emails, I learned that Haley and Tina now had the last name Turner. Haley lived with Barry Stewart, but wasn't married to him. Tina was in 5th grade. On Monday, I gave the information and a $500 deposit to a private investigator in El Paso, who confirmed the address and other details were current. Tuesday morning after work, I knocked on my parents' door. Although my mother had visited me in prison, I hadn't seen my father since my sentencing. Back then, he had looked at me with sadness and pain. Now he stood at the door, and I wondered if he would let me in. "Hi, Dad." Dad opened the door wide and pulled me into the house. He looked me in the eyes and then hugged me. "Mary, Charlie's home." Mom came into the room and hugged me too. "Would you like some coffee?" "Yes, please." We sat down at the same kitchen table where I used to eat lunch as a child. Margaret Turner wasn't the only one who liked routines. "Mom, Dad, first let me apologize for letting you down. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your wise words. I'm sorry that I let a bunch of losers convince me to get revenge." Mom hugged me again, and Dad put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "I know where Haley and Tina are, and I want you to help me reestablish contact with Tina. I have a few $1,000s to go to El Paso and do whatever it takes to at least get visitation rights. Will you come with me and help?" Dad answered first. "What are you planning to do? Nothing violent, right?" I was hurt that my past actions made that his first question. "No, I'm going to consult a lawyer first. I've done my time. I'm not a parolee, so I can go in and try to get a court order for visitation. But let's be honest, I'm an ex-convict, convicted of assault. I think it would be best if my parents came with me and the three of us filed an appeal." Dad looked at Mom, and I saw the pleading in her eyes. She didn't need to say a word. Dad agreed. "When do we go?" "Can you be ready in a week? I need to give notice at work and settle some things. Can we take your car? We'll need wheels while we're there." "Yeah, I'll take it to the shop tomorrow and make sure it's ready to go. We'll head out next Monday, okay?" With that, I had another cup of coffee and caught up on some family gossip. It felt good to be home again. Over the next few days, I used my free time to find the best family lawyers in the El Paso area. After finding one with great reviews, I called and made an appointment for the following Thursday. That gave us 3 full days to drive to El Paso. I hoped Dad and Mom could make the trip. Dad was almost 70, and Mom was 66. Dad's Lincoln Continental. Turns out good old Mom is a big Matthew McConaughey fan. It would have been the perfect car for the trip. But when Dad found out about the Thursday appointment, we all agreed to leave on Sunday and have an extra day to cover the 1,500 miles. That Sunday, I, a 36-year-old man, set out on the trip with my mother and father. We drove out of town. It's all freeways now, but years ago it was Route 66. Before we entered St. Louis, Dad told us how when he was only 3, his parents drove that road to Los Angeles. Back then, all the roads were 2-lane roads. You couldn't drive more than 400 miles in a day. It took the family 7 days to get to Los Angeles. It seems my grandfather, who died before I was born, had a job waiting for him in California. One of his army buddies was in the painting business. After the war, with all the new buildings being built, it was supposed to be a gold mine. Unfortunately, Dad said his mom, my grandmother, was homesick the whole year they lived in Pasadena. My grandfather packed up the family and returned to Racine. Everything ended up working out for the best. My grandfather became the CEO of an aluminum smelter. He was doing well until he was found hunched over his desk, dead of a heart attack at 58. I was born a year later and named in his honor. During the 4 days we spent in the car, Mom and Dad shared more stories about the old days, stories I had either forgotten or was too busy to listen to growing up. I moved away when I was 18, so this was the longest we had spent together since our last vacation to Washington, D.C. when I was 14. On Thursday afternoon, we arrived at the law office of Gladys Harper. Unlike my previous encounters with the law, this was a positive experience. I told the lawyer everything: how I was convicted, my time in jail, the lack of communication with Tina, how my parents were also deprived of contact, my divorce from Haley, her subsequent marriage, and her divorce from Trent. The lawyer's eyes lit up when she heard that Trent was suing for infidelity and child abandonment. It wasn't a pretty picture, but it didn't make Haley look like an angel either. The lawyer's reluctance to take our case vanished when my mother nearly broke down in tears, explaining how she couldn't hold on to her granddaughter. I gave the lawyer a deposit, and she started working on the paperwork. Now, all we had to do was wait. We decided not to spend the weekend in El Paso, and instead traveled to Big Bend National Park. Despite our preoccupation with the events in El Paso, it was an incredible weekend enjoying the sights of the quiet and stunning park along the Rio Grande. 4 days later, I received a call from Miss Harper, the administrator. We were to meet at her office Tuesday morning to prepare for a hearing before a judge. By Tuesday afternoon, Gladys Harper was busy. She even had a signed statement from Trent Miller stating that Haley had dumped him and severed his relationship with Tina. I later learned that Trent did this on one condition: Tina had to be told that Trent had not abandoned her and that he loved her. We met again in the lobby of the courthouse and headed to the judge's office. I'm not naive. It was clear within the first 10 minutes that the judge and our attorney had a great working relationship. We answered the judge's questions. Then Miss Harper clarified that we were only seeking a preliminary meeting with Tina to reestablish contact and were willing to have a court-appointed social worker accompany us. Miss Harper told the judge, "Given Miss Turner's past actions in denying the client's contact with Tina and then doing the same with Trent Miller, we ask that Haley Turner not be informed of the meeting, as she will likely use this time to delay it and further turn Tina against the clients." That's where the working relationship and all the money we were paying Harper paid off. You could have knocked me over with a feather when the judge granted the request. The meeting was set for the next day. We were to pick Tina up from her school with the judge's order in hand, accompanied by Miss Harper and a social worker. We were given 3 hours to take Tina to a local cafe, talk to her, and then drive her home. Walking out of the courthouse into the warm Texas sunshine, I couldn't remember ever feeling as light and happy as I did at that moment. It took all my willpower not to hug Miss Harper right there. She said she was already working on the paperwork to establish visitation rights for me and my parents. "We'll meet tomorrow at 1:45 in my office. The social worker will go with you to the school. Once we pick up Tina, I will leave you. The social worker will stay with you until you take Tina home. Until tomorrow, don't do anything that could mess things up. Stay sober. Stay calm. Whatever you say or do, especially when Tina's mom overreacts, stay calm. We expect her to do or say something in front of the social worker that will only help us when we petition for visitation. Treat the social worker like she is your friend, because she may become one when the case goes back to court. The judge just gave us a valuable gift, so treat it that way." With those words, she walked away. I hugged Mom and Dad and thanked them again for their help. The next 22 hours dragged on. We stayed close to the hotel and grabbed a bite to eat at the diner across the street. Part of me expected something bad to happen. Would we show up at Tina's school tomorrow and find that she wasn't there? My parents tried their best to reassure me, but I could see the worry on their faces. We arrived at Gladys Harper's office at 1:35. Minutes later, a short, stout woman of Hispanic descent entered the office. Miss Marie Hernandez introduced herself and spent several minutes explaining how she would conduct surveillance while trying not to be intrusive. Apparently, she had read our attorney's motions because she was very kind to my mother. Like one grandmother to another, Miss Hernandez also gave us some advice on how best to approach Tina after such a long and traumatic separation. Later, we were grateful for this advice. I had been plagued by anxiety about how Tina would react to my appearance. We walked into the school's administrative office 30 minutes before dismissal. The principal and vice principal read the court order, called the district office, and spoke with the legal department before agreeing to allow Tina to leave with us. 10 minutes before the dismissal bell rang, Tina was taken out of class and brought to the vice principal's office. The first person she saw was my mother, and Tina's eyes lit up when she recognized her grandmother. "Nana!" Tina ran into her grandmother's arms, and my mom dropped to one knee to hug her back. She was openly crying. Tina looked up when she saw my father approaching. "Daddy!" When Tina started talking, she couldn't say Grandpa and called him Daddy instead. The name stuck, and we all thought it was cute. Daddy picked Tina up, hugged her, and kissed her on the nose. Tina then looked at me, standing off to the side. "Daddy?" given my changed appearance since our last meeting. Her hesitation was understandable. Miss Hernandez had suggested letting Tina see her grandparents first because they looked the same as 5 years ago, and there's always a special bond with grandparents. I knelt and held out my arms, praying my hug would be accepted. Tina ran into my arms. Our reunion was interrupted when the vice principal entered the office with Haley, who was waiting in the parking lot to pick up Tina. Haley looked around and exploded. "What the hell is going on? What are you all doing here? Leave Tina alone!" Miss Harper entered with Miss Hernandez beside her. Miss Harper handed Haley a court order. "Miss Turner, this court order allows Tina's father and grandparents to visit her today for 3 hours, accompanied by Miss Hernandez to ensure her safety and compliance with the order to return Tina to you within 3 hours, starting immediately." Haley glanced at the papers and tossed them back to Miss Harper. "I don't care what these papers say. You can't just come in here and take my daughter." Haley pointed at me and my parents. "Those people have no business being here. She's my daughter." Haley grabbed Tina, who hid behind my mom. Miss Hernandez, standing in front of Haley, noticed this dynamic. "Miss Turner." Before she could continue, Haley shouted at her, using derogatory language about Miss Hernandez's ethnicity and physique. "Miss Turner, do you want me to call the police? If so, keep it up, and I guarantee you will be put in jail until you calm down and stop threatening people." At this point, the vice principal intervened, trying to calm Haley down. They entered her office, and we took the opportunity to leave with Tina and Miss Hernandez. The 4 of us sat in a small cafe a few blocks from the school with Miss Hernandez at a nearby table. She had advised us on how to start a conversation with Tina after so many years apart. We followed her advice, and it made a big difference. Tina didn't seem intimidated by our presence, but my heart broke when my little girl tearfully asked, "Daddy, why didn't you ever call me or write me? Why didn't I get cards for my birthdays?" Thankfully, I was prepared. I pulled a large manila envelope from Mom's purse. "Tina, I thought of you every day we were apart. Here are all the letters, postcards, and birthday cards I sent. They were all returned to me. Your mother sent them back. She didn't want me and your grandparents in your life. Twice I hired lawyers to get her to let me talk to you." I showed Tina the envelopes, each marked "Returned to Sender" by Haley. "But why did she do that, Daddy?" I wanted to say, "Because your mother is a cow," but I didn't. I took her hand and said, "Someday you'll have to ask your mom about this, but not today. Today, let's just talk together. You, me, and your grandparents. We all love you and want to know how you're doing in school. What are your friends' names? Do you play sports?" 3 hours flew by. The 5 of us got into Dad's Lincoln and drove to Haley's house, arriving right on time. Haley was standing on the porch, smoking a cigarette, looking pissed off. I parked the car at the curb when Tina asked from the back seat, "I want to show you my room." I looked at Haley and replied, "I don't know if that's a good idea today, Tina. Your mom doesn't seem to want us in your house." "But it's my house, and I should have the right to invite people into my room." Tina looked so offended that Mom said, "Why don't you show me your room today, Tina? Next time we can all see it." Tina agreed. Miss Hernandez said she needed to accompany them. Mom, Miss Hernandez, and Tina got out of the back seat and walked up to the porch. Dad and I couldn't hear the words clearly, but the exchange was heated. As intimidating as Haley looked, Miss Hernandez was even scarier. A few minutes later, Mom, Miss Hernandez, and Tina entered the house. Haley stayed on the porch, shooting daggers at Dad and me. She even tripped us up. To this day, I don't understand why Haley hates me so much. We stood there for about 10 minutes when 2 patrol cars pulled up, one in front of our car and one behind. I'll admit that for a moment I panicked. Had my hit and run with Ronald Young gotten out? Had someone figured out that I was behind the fake internet scam? I was this close to being back together with my little girl, and here it was. As 4 police officers spilled out of 2 patrol cars, Barry Stewart pulled up in the driveway and ran to the porch. Miss Hernandez met them at the front door. Dad and I watched the police officers handcuff Haley and Barry. What the hell was going on? I wanted to jump out of the car, but Dad held me back. "I'm going to take a look. Charlie, you stay here." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Before Dad could get out of the car, Mom came out of the house, quickly walked over to the car, and got in the back seat. Barry and Haley were being ushered into one of the patrol cars by 2 policemen. One cop from the second car stayed on the porch. The other went into the house with Miss Hernandez. They came back with Tina. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" "I don't know. Miss Hernandez was looking around Tina's room when she noticed a toy on her shelf. She picked it up and then asked Tina some questions that I couldn't hear. After Tina answered, Miss Hernandez pulled out her phone and called the police, asking them to come quickly with 2 patrol cars. That's all I know. At that moment, Miss Hernandez approached our car. "I'm sorry, but Tina is coming with me to the station. We need to ask her some questions. Call Miss Harper and have her meet us there. Tina will probably stay with the social services family until everything is sorted out." I had to ask, "What exactly needs to be sorted out? What's going on?" "We don't know yet. I don't think Tina has been maltreated, but some suspicious things were found in her room, and the police have to investigate. In the meantime, Tina will be safe with me. Please be patient. Please trust me. I only care about Tina's welfare. Call Miss Harper." It took 3 weeks, but we eventually got the whole story. Thanks to Gladys Harper's skill, everything turned out in our favor. When Miss Hernandez found the stuffed animal on Tina's shelf, she recognized it as a remote camera. She called the police, and the camera was enough to get a search warrant. Barry's computer was found with all the incriminating information on it. It turned out that Haley didn't know about Barry's spying. It didn't help that Haley had echoed derogatory remarks about Miss Hernandez at school. Judge Torres tried to remain impartial, but it didn't help Haley. Miss Harper built such a strong case that Haley wasn't even given visitation rights. 2 months after arriving in Texas, we were leaving in Dad's car with Tina strapped into the seat next to Mom. Tina and I moved into my in-laws' house for almost the entire first year. Following the therapist's advice, we had to treat Tina carefully. We even allowed Trent to attend Tina's 11th birthday party. Forgiveness was part of the therapist's recommendations, which meant allowing Haley's mother limited access to Tina. These measures kept me on my toes, but after a half-hour conversation with Tina's therapist, I agreed that it was for Tina's sake, and I just had to accept it. The hardest part was when Haley moved back to the city. We let Tina visit her mom at her grandmother's house a few times until her mom got a call from Margaret Turner. "I hate to do this, but I have to tell you. Haley says horrible things about you, Charlie, and Hank. I just can't believe I raised such a horrible person. It breaks my heart, but I don't want you to alienate me from my granddaughter. I don't think Haley should be with Tina anymore." That was all I needed to hear. Haley was cut off from Tina, and by going to court, she lost all rights. To Tina, it was disgusting, to say the least. Haley was swearing and threatening all of us, including Tina and Margaret, before being escorted out of the courtroom by her embarrassed attorney. Our family life was becoming like a bad episode of the Jerry Springer Show. Haley refused to obey the judge's order, showing up at our door at odd hours, ignoring the restraining order we eventually served her, and banging on our door whenever we didn't answer. Even after she spent a weekend in jail, nothing changed. When the police proved to be a weak deterrent, I decided to resort to another tactic. Once again, I sat across from Juwan Price at a downtown diner. Leaning on her costs $1,000. $2,000 means physical impact. 10 is permanent. I don't want her hurt. Just walk away. Okay, we'll politely ask her to leave town. Juwan accepted the envelope and left. I wasn't surprised to learn that 2 weeks later, Haley was back in Texas. A year later, I was surprised to hear she had moved back in with Barry Stewart after he was paroled. The last I heard from Margaret was that she and Barry were living in Nicaragua after he skipped out on his parole. I ended up talking to Tina's therapist about Haley. She said it's impossible to diagnose someone without meeting them, but given some of Haley's behaviors, it's likely she suffers from one or more psychoses. I was glad to see this woman gone for the foreseeable future. During all this drama, I discovered I had acquired a marketable skill during my time in prison. My father provided me with capital, and I opened a small store in a shopping center where I did website design and personal computer repair. No ordinary firm would hire a criminal, trusting them with so much information. But having my own business worked. Very few, if any, of my clients did background checks on me, and I played fair, no joke. I made $50,000 to $60,000 a year, enough to pay the rent on our apartment and provide for Tina and my needs. It had been 4 years. For the last 3 years, Tina has been jogging and bicycling with me. She is going to be an excellent middle-distance runner. The high school track coach has his eye on Tina. Next year, Tina will probably compete in high school as a sophomore. Saturday morning, Tina and I spent the morning bicycling and running a fun run in Crystal Lake, a 25-mile bike course followed by a 10-kilometer run. Throughout the bike course, we stayed together. The last 2 miles, we rode behind a woman who pedaled fast, even with one prosthetic leg. Tina remarked how courageous it was to compete with such an obstacle. Of course, this woman reminded me of Candy, but she had short brown hair, and her prosthetic leg was very different from Candy's. I never once looked at her face as we passed her, but the memory of that night with Candy almost embarrassed me. After all, I was with my daughter. Not the best time to be having such thoughts. We switched from bike to run, and 42 minutes later, as Tina and I approached the finish line, a woman passed and finished in front of us. Tina walked up to her while we were catching our breath and introduced herself. The woman stood with her back to me and graciously accepted Tina's outstretched hand. "That was amazing. Thank you." Tina kept walking and talking, and I held back, not wanting to interrupt her. It's like Tina to make new friends wherever she goes. Lately, she's been trying to get me to meet more people and strike up conversations with women she doesn't know. After a few minutes, they stopped and turned to me. It was a face I could never forget. "This is my dad, Charlie Klein. Dad, this is Casey Sweeney." Candy, now Casey, looked at me, not recognizing me at first, but something flashed in her eyes. "Nice to meet you, Casey." I shook her hand. "Dad, I told Casey we'd stop at that place on the river where you like to eat." Casey agreed to join us. I laughed. "That would be great. We're heading to the Broken Paddle. Do you know it?" Now Casey had time, and she remembered when and why we first met. "Maybe I should let you two have some father-daughter time. Let me take a reprieve." "Casey, that's very nice of you, but we've been spending time together all week. I think Tina would enjoy the company of another person of her lovemaking for a change. Please don't disappoint Tina or me. Join us." "Are you sure?" I replied. "Do I need to beg?" "If Daddy won't, I will. Please come with us." Casey smiled. "Okay, I'll meet you there." As Tina and I stowed our bikes in the car, I said a little prayer that Casey wouldn't flake on us and meet us at the Broken Paddle. She did show up, and for the next half hour, while I sat at a table eating a burger and drinking a beer, they talked between appetizers like old friends. Tina was very excited to learn that Casey graduated from the Art Institute with a degree in photography. The Art Institute is Tina's favorite museum in Chicago, and art is her favorite school subject. I spent some time eavesdropping and learned that Casey works for a marketing company as a product photographer for online catalogs. Most small retail stores that don't have their own staff use an agency like the one Casey works for to create their store websites. Their conversation was interrupted by a young man asking Tina if she wanted to join him and his friends in a game of beanbag toss. Tina asked Casey and me if that was okay to do. "Sure, it would give me a chance to talk to your dad." I agreed, and Tina left with the young man. I followed her departure with my eyes, glad I could keep her in sight. "You'll have a lot of work to do. She's already a beautiful young woman." "Yes, but she has a good head on her shoulders. I trust her. Thank you for joining us. I didn't know what to expect when you recognized me." "I'm glad you did. I don't remember Tina getting attached to anyone as quickly as she did to you. I want you to know something. When I was in the business, I didn't react to men the way you did. The way you acted with that man at the bar. And the way you treated me respectfully that night. Why didn't you ever call me again? I was hoping you would call." I decided to tell her the truth. I needed to deal with my reunion with Tina first. And when that turned into me becoming a full-fledged single parent, I focused on our relationship and Tina's mental health. I had just gotten out of prison, and it would have been easy to fall in love with you, especially with how beautiful you were. "And you didn't want to fall in love with a strumpet?" "I didn't say that. Please don't put words in my mouth and don't think that way. I'm sorry. Are you still working as an escort?" I decided to use a nicer expression to describe Casey's profession. "No, not since I graduated and got this job. I have a good income and health insurance. I quit the day I was hired. My medical bills are paid and I got a new leg." "And how are your parents? I seem to remember you and them being estranged." "You have a good memory. Mom talks to me now. Dad still has a hard time accepting that I spent 18 months selling myself. He says he'd rather mortgage their house and empty his 401k, but I could never do that to them. It's been 3 years since my last date, and even though it's been a while, Dad seems to want to forget that horrible time in our lives." Casey and I spent the rest of the hour talking about Tina and our work. When Tina returned to our table, it was time to leave. "Can Casey come over for dinner next weekend?" All I could think about at that moment was how happy I was to have such a smart daughter. Dinner the following weekend started a series of dinners, then dates, and eventually a romance. Casey and I have been dating for a little over a year now. I've been thinking about proposing to her, and Tina is all for it. She loves Casey, and they've become best friends. Before I ask Casey, I'm going to ask her father for his blessing. Hopefully, this will help spur their too-slow reconciliation. Her father, like many men, wonders why Casey's past as a courtesan doesn't bother me. Perhaps it would, but Casey and I have talked it out. We both agree that fidelity in marriage is non-negotiable. Some might say I'm a complete idiot for marrying a former courtesan and letting her into my daughter's life. But let me tell you a little story. 2 years before that race day in Crystal Lake, I was dating a very nice woman, and we were getting serious. One day, she asked me how I lost my 2 front teeth. I decided to tell her the whole truth, including my relationship with Ron Young, but not about the subsequent attempt on his life. Shortly thereafter, she became unavailable for dates and any meetings. The message was clear. She couldn't tolerate a man who had done what I did to survive a prison sentence. After a few months of getting to know Casey, when things got serious and we became exclusive, I decided Casey needed to know the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Casey looked up at me when I finished the story, and her blue eyes sparkled. Sometimes, to survive, we do things that contradict who we think we are. The most important thing is not to let it change you from the inside out. You have to forgive yourself and vow to remain who you used to be. You are back to being Charlie Klein, a loving father and a good guy. If you need to forgive yourself for what happened in prison, start today. I love you, Charlie Klein, and don't think you have anything to be ashamed of. Of course, Casey didn't say that when she hugged me, but she didn't need to. Sometimes forgiveness, if you love the right person, is all you need to live a good life.